Can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we can begin. Gurpreet, Daman, are you guys ready?
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lamin, and I'm the co-president of Sangat Youth. And just building off of our earlier discussions in the breakout rooms, we're going to be sharing more about what the future of Punjab looks like and the ways that you can support the movement going on right now and show your solidarity. I'll just take a second to explain who we are and what we do. We're a completely youth-led organization based in Edmonton, and we're working to amplify the voices of the Sikh minority community here in Edmonton and provide them relevant resources, as well as share relevant resources with the greater Canadian community as well, and kind of reduce the misinformation that exists. But I'll pass it over to Simran now.
We would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are talking to you today from Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Abidjwe, Tsleil-Waututh, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many other whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We would also like to take this minute, a minute to acknowledge our spelling of Punjab, which is a non-colonial term. Most people spell it with a U, but the original term was with an A. The U came in after the British colonized India. And then we would also like to thank the JHC and Writing Relations for inviting us to speak at this webinar in regards to the ongoing farmers' protests.
All right. So before we begin speaking about ways to address the ongoing protests in India, we would like to take a minute to remember the Sikh genocide, the first phase of which took place during the first 10 days of June 1984, during which the desecration of Harmandir Sahib, which is most commonly known as the Golden Temple, by the Indian military took place. This year marks 37 years since the tragedy, and our community continues to mourn the thousands of innocent lives lost solely on the basis of their religious beliefs.
So here's a little summary of the farmers bills that were passed in September 2020. On the timeline document, you guys can see more detail. Just to summarize it, the first bill will eliminate government subsidies, which has led to the fear that there's going to be no MSP or minimum support price. And there's certain crops that the government sets a price to, and if the farmer takes it to the market, that's what they're going to get for selling their crop. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to open the farmers up to exploitation by larger corporate entities. The second bill states that farmers can no longer take their disputes to court, and rather the disputes would be dealt with by a local government official. And because of India's deep-rooted history of corruption, this will be another avenue of exploitation, as the officials are more likely to side with the corporations. And this unfortunately makes the option of a legal route non-existent to over half of the country's population. And the third bill that was passed gives public and private entities the ability to store unlimited amounts of goods and allows the government to control distribution, production, and supply of said goods. Most farmers do not have the ability to match that storage capacity at the extent that corporations can, and this is another way for corporate powers to manipulate the prices of the market and maximize their own profits. These bills pose a huge risk to the sovereignty of Punjab's land because the exploitation that these bills open the farmers up to could lead to them being even further indebted and at risk of losing their land. This would hand it over to the hands of the corporations, taking it away from those who have handled it with their blood, sweat, and tears over multiple generations.
So we're going to look to the future and see what this would have in store for farmers if these bills stay instated. So first, we would like to address that farmers will be attracted to the private players that this bill will introduce to the agricultural sector because they have the ability to offer better minimum prices for the produce, but this will also cause government mandis not to be relied upon. Once these mandis use is menial, they can shut down and leave it just simply to the private sector to maintain control. When this private sector has the control, exploitation will become the norm. And the government has stated that the mandi system will continue, but has only been through verbal communication, not written into law. The farmers are hesitant to take the government's word for it, as if they go back on these promises, it'll essentially be a death warrant for small and marginalized farmers. Farmers are mainly concerned that this will eventually lead to the end of wholesale markets and assured prices, leaving them with no backup option. So it will come across, like for the first 2 to 3 decades even, it might be like the best thing that's happened. But at the end of the day, it will lead to like death warrants. And the protests have been the strongest in Punjab and Haryana because the Mandi system still has a very big stronghold and farmers use this as a bargaining chip. Farmers are already subjected with the previous laws to relying on loans that come with high interest rates and lead to immense debt. The average debt for an Indian farmer is over 100,000 rupees per owned acre of land. At a time where farmers in India need agricultural reform, the government instead listened to corporate interests rather than the farmers and passed bills in the other direction. And we're going to talk about 2 corporate players that have had a vested interest called the Ambani and Adani Group, who have set their eyes on the farms of Punjab to be their next billion-dollar project. We've seen how these bills have also played out in states like Bihar, who have gotten rid of the Mandi system, where the yearly income has dropped to 3,500 rupees per year, while Punjab's rests at 18,000. But with the implementation of these bills, we will see a similar future as Bihar. Punjab produces a lot of agricultural goods, but the producers of these goods will no longer be able to yield their own food if these bills get passed.
So the protest that's happening in Delhi began in November 2020 and it's now June. So these protesters have been sitting on the streets of Delhi for 7 months. And the number that you see on the screen of 502 deaths is from 3 days ago. And unfortunately, these bills were passed during a time where the farmers were already vulnerable due to the economic conditions that were present. And on top of that, there was the added stress of the pandemic. And between 2000 and 2015, there have been over 16,000 recorded farmer suicides, and 94% of these were due to debt, which Simran just briefly explained how high that is. So if the pre-existing conditions in Punjab have led to such high debt and such high suicide rates, we can only imagine how inflated these numbers will become once the new laws come fully into effect.
So I know there's a lot of information on this infographic, but I'm just gonna highlight a couple of things. So basically, despite making up less than 2% of India's area, as in like the land, Punjab produces over 10% of the country's food grains. And Punjab is also known as the heartland of India's Sikh minority, which make up pretty much 50% of the state's population. And so despite being mainly an agricultural or agrarian society, Punjab's population is among the most globalized in the world, with a sizable diaspora living in Western nations such as Canada, the US, as well as England. And so that kind of shows that there's a migration outside of Punjab, even though we are kind of like a farming society, is that mainly if you study the migration patterns, you'll see a large amount of Punjab's population, especially younger people, are realizing that situations are dire within the homeland and are trying to find a better life abroad. As well, I would like to highlight that Punjab produces 5 tons of wheat and 4 tons of paddy per hectare, but the national average is, in relation to those numbers, is 3.5 tons and 2.6 tons. So that means Punjab, while making up a very small part of India's landmass, it does overproduce in those cereal crops that were the most recommended during the Green Revolution, and those are water-intensive crops. And it's kind of just like combines in a weird way because they're water-intensive crops that need a lot of water, but then there's also not that much water left in Punjab, which kind of will lead to a snowball effect that will effectively leave Punjab as like a desert in the next couple of years.
And just continuing off of what Gurpreet said, the future of Punjab is met with a lot of water scarcity and health issues due to Punjab's water being diverted in the Punjabi Suba movement in 1966. Punjab's water was diverted into other states, and farmers have had to turn to tube well irrigation with upwards of 72%. of farmers relying on groundwater, which is not a sustainable future, especially when we acknowledge that the push for Punjab to harvest water-intensive crops like rice, like Gurpreet said, the overuse of groundwater has led to the drop in Punjab's water table to be at a dangerous level. Again, so much so that experts believe that Punjab will become a desert in the next 15 to 20 years. Furthermore, one of the health concerns that have resulted due to the Green Revolution's policies has been an increased rate of blood pressure, diabetes, infertility, cancer, and mental health problems. The infertility and cancer rates are especially problematic within the Punjab region, with the national rates being at least 5% higher, and the cancer rate is exponentially higher than the rest of the Indian states, with there even being a well-known cancer belt that exists within the Punjab region, which is there are so many people that have been diagnosed with like very rare forms of cancer that they've had to create like a train system that is just to provide access from one region of Punjab to hospitals in another region. And it operates 365 days a year simply to transport patients that have cancer.
So pretty much what we've heard sometimes from some people is that, oh, this is an issue that's so far away. It's basically on the other side of the world. Why should we care about issues like the farmers' protests and the state of Punjab in general? And why you should care is when you take one look at, say, your pantry, for example. India is the world's largest producer, consumer, and exporter of spices. We create 68% of the world's spices, and they're everyday spices as well. So there's pepper, cardamom, ginger, chili, things like that that are most commonly staples in Western society and across the world. We're also the leading exporter of basmati rice and milk, especially in states such as Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi, which are the most affected by the farmers' protests and the farmers' bills. The country is also the world's second largest producer of rice, wheat, and other cereals, which are those water-intensive crops that we're speaking about, which are primarily produced in Punjab. Another way to look at it is your closet, just because India is the world's leading producer of cotton, accounting for 40% of the world's total. And one that's the most important right now is your lifestyle. So we see kind of things like yoga, herbal treatment, homeopathy, breathing exercises, things that are now becoming a trend. And they stem from Indian culture, Hindu beliefs, and a culture of people that is built on the backs of farmers. So in this picture, we have like the cost of a latte. I don't know how many people are fans of chai lattes, but there is a considerable amount. And in this infographic, I don't know if we can zoom in a little bit, but we do have basically the components of the latte and which state in India they come from. So it's also just some, I guess, literal food for thought, is that these things that you consume on the daily, you should be able to thank a farmer for that. And that kind of allows you to see a personal aspect into why you should care about the farmers' protests and why you should care about the state of Punjab.
So me and Gurpreet are just going to quickly touch on what you can do. There's 4 action items that we're going to talk about today. The number 1 is understanding the impact that these bills will have on an already vulnerable population, understanding the propaganda that the Indian and Western media have launched in order to discredit the protests. I'm not sure if any of you got the opportunity to look at how farmers were being framed in the Indian context, but if you do, try to understand what they're fighting against. It's like a double battle, and then understanding the ecological impacts that these bills will have on the Punjab region, and then just like Gurpreet discussed, throughout the entire world. And then second action item is educating yourself on the history of Punjab and the Farmers' Bill without depending on Punjabis to take on the emotional labor. Educating yourself on the Sikh genocide of 1984, especially during the first 10 days of June, and educating yourself on India's colonial rule on the state of Punjab and the disenfranchisement of its people.
So the other 2 parts of what you can do as an individual or on like a group level is advocacy. I know many members in this group are very familiar with advocacy, whether it's person to person or signing a petition or anything like that. So a couple of forms of advocacy that you can do that require pretty minimal effort is following Punjabi Sikh social media accounts whose focus is on advocacy, and we'll have some examples of that as well. Providing support to your Punjabi peers. Is a fairly large percentage of Punjabi Sikhs that live in this city, in this province, and in this country. And this one's the most important, is speaking up in conversations surrounding the farmers' protest or Punjabis in general, especially when Punjabis are not present. This goes into the idea of performative activism, and basically you being able to speak up when those around you don't have a voice is the greatest tool and the greatest privilege that you could possibly have. And the last point is donate. So if possible, if you're able to donate to an organization working on the ground that provides a critical care to services, such as, I think there's like COVID vaccines, doctors, medical support, food, shelter, water, things like that. That's also a great way to help. And we'll also have some examples later on.
Yeah, so we'll go through the 4 action items that Simran and Gurpreet have shared and show you how you can actually follow through with those. So this is our Instagram account. If you visit it, there's a link in the bio, which if you click on that, we have a section specifically for the farmers' protest. So where it says resources, just a little up, Simran. Yeah, it says resources right under the Ambani one, right there. That's going to take you to another sort of link page that was created for the farmers' protest specifically, and you can see there's a lot of sections here. So to understand and educate yourself and others around you, you can go through the farmers' demands. They have linked articles as well. So this just lists out the farmers' demands, and there's a website that takes you right to the Kisan Ekta Morcha is what we call the movement in Punjabi. There's relevant articles, recent articles, live reports from multiple journalists on the ground, as well as social media accounts that you can follow that are speaking to what's going on. So these are 4 journalists that have been on the ground since pretty much day one. And if you follow them on Twitter, there's live reports as soon as something happens, that's where you can find it. And then with the social media accounts, one that we'd like to highlight is called Saving Punjab. They talk about everything, not just the farmers' protest, not just the land issues. They've talked about the drug problem in Punjab with the youth. They've talked about the water crisis. They've talked about the fact that there's a higher male population than there is female to sustain like the birth rate or the population of Punjab. And they have very great informative posts. So I would highly recommend checking that out as well. And then they have a whole bunch listed on there. Boz News.org is a online news, I guess, channel. It's totally run by Sikhs and Punjabis from the diaspora. So you're getting a firsthand perspective of what they think rather than somebody else writing on our behalf without our input. And they also have great reporting. And Simran, if you could just go back, the same link tree also has links to petitions, email templates for you to send out videos and donations. So this is a great starting point. But as always, like you can find us on Instagram at Sangat Youth and Facebook, and we're constantly posting updates and everything like that as well. And you can feel free to reach out to us at any point if you have any questions or would like to learn more. But that's pretty much everything that we have for you guys today.
We just wanted to quickly highlight, you know how we were talking about Ambani and Adani being like one of the 2 corporate people with very vested corporate interests. There's a link somebody has created where you can, it's also linked in our Instagram, where if you click it, you can go through and see, do I own any products linked to the Ambanis, to see if your products that you have in your homes are sustainable, like Gurpreet talked about. So like, we could do an example of, somebody give me any example that they have and I can put it in and see if.
Simran, just maybe click like investors or something on the bottom and it'll actually show you a bunch.
Okay. Yeah. So these are the investors into I think this is Ambani specifically. So these are all of the people that have vested interest. And if we say like denim, like G-Star, I think that's a thing here. So like you can see like that's owned by them. So if you wanted to boycott it, like that is something you could do. And I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. So we have a lot of sources linked into our bio.
What about Joe Fresh?
Joe Fresh is not linked to this protest. Like he's not linked to Mbani that we know of. Like I've searched it up, it hasn't, but there's like super prominent brands like Burberry is one that's really big that you wouldn't think of would have a vested interest in like India. There's what else was there? There's a lot. Like if you go through it, you wouldn't think it would be that common, but like a lot of like our products are from there. Like Kate Spade and like Michael Kors are directly linked to him. Like you would never think of these like products that were made in the West being linked to like like somebody there and like linked to the farmers protest in any single way. And then we just wanted to save like 5 minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions about anything we've talked about today. If not, then we could just move on.
That was so complete and amazing. Thank you so much. Like there's a lot of hard work on not only on the presentation, but on what you do on a daily basis on the webpage that you have created and the links and everything is put there for us. So thank you so much. I will I'll pass it to Marco. And then we can move into at the end for more action items. Marco?